Hey everyone, we see you joining us. Give us just a few moments and we'll get started in a minute. Thanks for being here tonight. Welcome everyone. I see you coming in. Give us just a few minutes. We will get started momentarily. Welcome everybody. Give us just 1 minute. We're going to let a couple more. We've got a few more people filtering in here, so I'm going to give them just a minute and then we will get started. All right, I'm going to go ahead and kick off. Welcome everyone to the Arlington Committee of 100. Our program for the evening is Historic Preservation in Arlington, What's Worthy, What's Not, and Who Decides. My name is Hannah Dannenfelser, and I'm the chair of the Arlington Committee of 100 for a few more days at least, and I will be your moderator for this evening. If you're watching us on Facebook Live and you think this is something your friends would like to hear, please consider sharing the Facebook Live to your page. To stay in touch with us, please like and follow the Facebook page. We publish our events through email announcements as well as those Facebook events, and we'd love to have you continue to join us. I also want to welcome our elected officials who are joining us today. I know Patrick Delegate Hope, who is our co-chair of our program committee, is down in Richmond, and so he will be joining us by recording. So I'm going to give a shout out to Patrick. I believe many of our elected officials are in session right now. If you are one of our elected officials and I missed you in the attendee list, please feel free to send a message, and I'd love to welcome you and thank you for being here. I'll go ahead and shout out Patrick for now. Before we start our program, we are going to take just a minute to conduct our annual meeting via Zoom. We're really excited to share the slate for our 2022 to 2023 Board of Directors. For those of you who are on our email list, you received the slate in your email inbox this morning. Our nominating committee has recommended that our members elect the following slate of nominees as officers and directors of the Arlington Committee of 100 for next year. For chair, Jerry Laporte. For vice chair, Lizette Arias. For secretary, Jeannie Broyhill. For treasurer, Timon Honda. Additionally, we're happy to present our current board members who are seeking an additional term. Link Cummings, myself, Patrick Hope, Wilma Jones, Lynn Jewell, Scott Pedowitz, Daniel Sanchez, and John Weistat. Sorry, John. We have 3 new directors for our members to vote on tonight. If you are on our email list, again, you've seen that slate, which has their bios in it. So please take a look at your email inbox if you'd like to read a little bit about our 3 new potential board members for your vote. We're excited to present Richard Lolich, Devanshi Patel, and Tony Weaver. If you've been a member of the Committee of 100 in the last 3 program years, so since the 2019 to 2020 program year, you are welcome to vote in the poll in just a moment. As the chair of the board and as the chair of the nominating committee, before we vote, I just wanted to share a few thoughts with you in advance of the vote. First, I want to thank all of the board members who are returning to the board. We have an incredibly strong group of community leaders, each of whom are extremely involved in the Arlington community. Our board represents many corners of Arlington and brings expertise gleaned from many years of civic engagement and many leadership roles. This is a group that's passionate about serving Arlington. We're incredibly grateful to our board members who are willing to continue to serve through the Committee of 100. Second, we're excited about presenting our officers for next year. They'll lead our organization very well into our next phases. If elected, you will especially get to know Jerry next year as our potential incoming chair. Jerry has a long history of involvement in Arlington. He has a true dedication and passion for our mission. He is incredibly detail-oriented, and he is a kind and generous leader. He served as our co-chair of the program committee and as the vice chair for the past 2 years. He's taken on a strong leadership role on our board, both in front of the scenes and behind the scenes. I can say that throughout my time as chair, I've leaned heavily on him for his expertise and perspective in the organization. I'm incredibly grateful to him, and I'm eager to actively support his success if he's elected chair for next year. And finally, we have 3 candidates for new board seats for next year. We're extremely excited about these candidates and look forward to the insights and impact that they're going to bring to our organization. Richard, Devanshi, and Tony are all seasoned community leaders with a deep knowledge of and passion for Arlington. So our board is enthusiastic about our candidacy. So again, if you've been a member of the Committee of 100 in the last 3 program years, so since the 2019 to 2020 program year, I'm going to put a poll up on the screen right now, and we are going to ask you to vote yay or nay. So if you are in the Zoom right now, please vote yay or nay in the poll, and I'm going to give you a minute to vote. See the votes coming in. I'm going to give it just a little bit more time. I do still see a couple people voting, so I'm going to give it a little bit more time. I'm going to give it about 15 more seconds. So if you are a member who is voting, please go ahead and get your vote in now. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And our slate is confirmed. Congratulations to our new officers, especially our new chair, Jerry Laporte, to our new board members, Devanshi, Tony, and Richard, and thank you to our returning board members. I look forward to serving with you next year. This concludes our annual meeting. Thank you very much to all of you for bearing with us as we go through. And again, we have some really fantastic folks who are joining our board. Really encourage you to read their bios and the email announcement that we sent out this morning. All 3 of them are fantastic additions. And Jerry, as our new chair, is going to be a fantastic leader for our organization next year. So I am getting a little nostalgic because after moderating for 2 years, I just want to bend your ear for a moment as I'm spending this evening concluding my term. Technically, I've got another week and a half, but this is really the moment where most of the duties end, is in our last program. First, I want to thank Scott Pedowitz. Usually Scott Pedowitz would be behind the scenes on Zoom tonight, as he has been doing for almost every program, if not every program, for the last 2 years. He has a job to do down in Richmond. So Daniel Sanchez and John Bystad are helping us out behind the scenes today, which I really appreciate. Scott is who initially recruited me to the Arlington Committee of 100. 4 or 5 years ago, time has stood still for a number of these past years. So it was 4 or 5, Scott called me and we had a long conversation about the Arlington Committee of 100. We talked about the importance of well-informed and high-quality conversation about critical issues. We talked about what that looks like in the world, in our country, and most importantly to us in Arlington. We talked about how important civic engagement is and why it takes people who are dedicated to learning first and then acting. And we talked about how the Arlington Committee of 100 serves that mission. I grew up here in Arlington, and I grew up close to the DC political scene. I grew up with a distaste for rampant, unproductive civil discourse, and I grew up with a desire to make a difference in a way that honored the truth, that brought people together, and that empowered people to be stronger leaders. I truly believe that's what this organization does. The board of the Arlington Committee of 100 loves to discuss. In fact, one of the hardest jobs as the chair of this organization is to keep us moving through meetings because we all crave mission-driven, intellectually honest discourse with peers who are committed to the same. Good luck, Jerry. It is a great problem to face as chair. I have had the honor of serving as a board member, a secretary, and 2 terms as chair, and I can say I'm as bought in on our mission as I was years ago when I said yes to Scott. I'm actually more bought in. I've come to really love the community that's formed around the Arlington Committee of 100 through our members and our attendees, and really our board. Our board has enjoyed the challenge that's come from pivoting our model. We all agree that it's time for a refresh of the Arlington Committee of 100, and we're all eager to figure out what the next phase of that is as the world is getting more consistently stable. We're figuring out what that means for a volunteer organization with a 70, did I do my math right? I think 70-year history, and how we're an organization that's relevant, vibrant, and impactful in the 2020s. We're going to keep talking and we're going to figure it out. I've been really privileged to be in this role with one of the most dedicated and well-informed groups of people you can find in Arlington. For those of you who have been with us for decades, which is many of you, because we're an organization with a long history, thank you. You've kept us strong and you've kept us rooted for a long time. For the many, many of you who are new to our organization over the past 2.5 years, welcome again. I hope we've said welcome enough, and thank you. You've been a welcome and fresh addition that we've all been really eager to bring into the organization. We look forward to keeping you engaged. Stay tuned for what that looks like in the future. There's a lot to come from the Arlington Committee of 100. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to our program for tonight. This evening, we are featuring, oh, and I'm sorry, I was talking over Daniel, would you go back a slide real quick? I'm sorry, I talked over the slide. I grabbed a couple pictures, and I'm gonna, a couple friends here. I want to particularly show this screenshot. I usually try not to do screenshots on pictures, but the screenshot with the pink border is our task force meeting 2.5 years ago when the pandemic hit, and we were one of the first organizations in the community to pivot to a virtual environment without skipping a beat, and we've come a long way since then. So a couple pictures when I've thought about what the Committee of 100 has been to me, some virtual, some in person. A shout out to JD, who got a picture of me, right, like the most awkward shot of my face scrunched up while I was moderating a panel. But I'm just grateful for all the people who have been part of this over the last 2 years. All right, go ahead, Daniel. Sorry about that. All right. This evening, our real focus and really why you're here is to talk historic preservation. We're featuring panelists to discuss what historic preservation looks like here in Arlington and the balance that we as a community strike between the old and the new. Thank you to Jerry Laporte, Ed Nolan, and John Weistat, who teamed up to coordinate the program. And in particular, I want to thank John Weistat, who worked incredibly hard to stand up an in-person event for us this evening. We ultimately needed, as an organization, to make the decision to revert to virtual for this month, but we're going to build on all of that work that John did so that we can look for in-person options in the future. John, we are incredibly grateful. It was a lot of work, and we look forward to what that looks like in the future. Thank you also to Kathy Hicks and Charlie Clark of the Arlington Historical Society and Eric Dobson of Preservation Arlington for their assistance in pulling together the program tonight. Charlie in particular is one of our most consistent attendees and as one of our members, and really grateful to all of them for all of their help tonight. As usual, we're going to have a Q&A. Panelists are going to speak. We're going to have a Q&A at the end with the audience. Please use that Zoom Q&A box. A reminder that we will be choosing questions that are submitted in the form of a question. And if a question is concise and to the point, I'm more likely to be able to ask it. It's just much easier that way. We do have a high volume of questions. We do our best to get to as many as we can. We never get to enough, but we'll get to as many as we can. All right, we are going to start with Cynthia. Cynthia is our first panelist this evening, and Cynthia LaChase Torres has been managing Arlington County Government's Historic Preservation Program in the Department of Community Planning, Housing and Development since 2013, and has been with the county since 2001. She's successfully completed 3 Arlington nominations to the National Register of Historic Places, including 2 historic homes, plus the Arlington Forest National Register Historic District. She's also successfully drafted 5 nominations for the Arlington Local Historic Districts, including Callaway Cemetery, the Fravor House, and the Green Valley Pharmacy. Her professional expertise in the field of historic preservation includes architectural history, historic research, preservation planning, and community engagement. She also strives to broaden the focus of historic preservation beyond just architecture by exploring and celebrating diversity, cultural heritage, and personal connections. Cynthia, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. If you want to turn on your camera and unmute yourself, all you.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, everyone, for the invitation this evening. I'm glad to participate and looking forward to an exciting conversation tonight. Hannah, can you confirm, do you see my slides?
Looks great.
Okay, wonderful. So good evening, everyone. Glad to be here. Now, if only my slides will advance. Oh no. Oh no, here we go. Okay. So Arlington's Historic Preservation Program dates back to 1976, when our Preservation Commission, the Historical Affairs and Landmark Review Board, also known as the HALRB, was established. Our program has always been part of the planning department. We currently are a staff of 4, including myself as the manager, 2 preservation planners, as well as a specialist. And our staff really serves 2 different roles in the county. We are the staff to the county's preservation office that reports to the county manager, and we also serve as staff to the HALRB. And you'll learn much more about the commission from our 3rd speaker, Mr. Woodruff. And as part of our daily work, we advocate for historic resources, we identify and research historic people and places, we educate the public, and we oversee the monthly design review process for the HLRB. And here's just a sample of the types of things that our program oversees. These include local historic districts to easement properties, to a vast collection of county historic markers, to important tools like our preservation master plan and our historic resources inventory, and I'll go into those in a little bit, as well as countywide planning studies and surveys. So to say we're constantly busy is an understatement. But some of you might be wondering, why do we preserve and why is it important to do this? And we have many challenges in Arlington, which is clear based on our topic tonight. Rapid changes affect our buildings and landscapes pretty much every day. Some residents feel that places that are built within their lifetime aren't yet old enough to be called historic. Many people are getting frustrated about teardowns in their neighborhoods and the large McMansions that are replacing them, but also are fearful of preservation-minded tools that might restrict what they could do to their properties. And still others consider design guidelines for some of our protected historic areas to be too strict, while others say they aren't strict enough. So we like to describe historic preservation as change management. We don't think of buildings and neighborhoods as frozen in any given moment in time, but rather as things that are fluid, adaptable, and evolving. Preservation allows communities to consider what they value most. Is it certain kinds of architecture? Is it mature trees? Is it buildings with a pedestrian-friendly scale? Preservation also helps us define a sense of place in community by recognizing not only our architectural history, but such things as transportation trends over time and connections to our cultural identity. In Arlington, we're always rethinking strategies for how we can identify historic resources, as well as how we can protect and reuse them. So here are some basics related to preservation. All localities in Virginia receive their legal governing authority to conduct preservation activities from the state. And I have the Code of Virginia citation here for those of you who want to dive into all the details if you're interested. And there are 2 main types of historic designation that I think everyone should be aware of, and I wanted to explain those quickly. The first is local historic district designation. This is an important protection because it saves properties from demolition and makes sure that any exterior alterations to these resources are done in a sensitive manner. And this is done through a special zoning overlay that is created by the county board. And it requires that a design review process that is overseen by the HLRB, that process oversees all exterior changes within the boundaries. And the 2 sections of the zoning ordinance are listed here on the slide. If you are interested in learning more about how the HLRB functions, how local districts are created, as well as how the design review process works. And currently we have 41 locally protected historic districts, and these range from single-family homes to churches and commercial buildings and cemeteries, as well as Civil War forts, single-family neighborhoods, as well as some garden apartments. So in contrast, listing in the National Register is simply honorary and does not offer any protections to historic properties. Created in 1966, it is a national list of sites that is maintained by the National Park Service. It honors historic events, people, places, and archaeology that are significant to American history. There is not a design review process, however, that governs changes to these properties, though there is a rehabilitation tax credit incentive that is available to owners. Currently, Arlington has 73 listings in the National Register, and all of the buildings shown here on this slide, starting with Colonial Village at the top, the Maywood on the right, and then Stratford Junior High School there at the bottom, all of these sites are not only locally protected historic districts, but they are also on the National Register. Preservation easements are the strongest tool that we have in our toolkit. Property owners convey a private legal interest to a government agency, such as Arlington County, or a qualified organization such as the State Preservation Office or the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Easements are permanent, recorded into a property's land deeds, and binds both current and future owners to protect their historic properties. And this is done in perpetuity. Easements typically prohibit an owner from demolishing their buildings and from making changes that are insensitive or inconsistent. Restrictions on subdividing and developing the property also are common with easements. However, alterations are still possible and typically require prior approvals from the easement holding organization. In Arlington, this means changes to easement properties are reviewed either by the preservation staff and in some cases by the HLRB and or the county manager. In Arlington, we administer 12 preservation easements, and these include 6 historic commercial buildings, 2 single-family homes, 3 garden apartment complexes, as well as 1 cemetery. And shown here on the slide at the top is the Eastman Fenwick property, as well as the Underwood building in Clarendon, which are both easement properties. Next, I just wanted to talk a little bit about our Historic Preservation Master Plan. This is one of the main tools that we use to highlight Arlington's history, architecture, and cultural heritage. It was first adopted in December of 2006 by the County Board as one of the 11 elements of the county's comprehensive plan. And our master plan lays out very specific goals for preservation with both short and long-term action items to achieve those goals. The original plan addresses such themes as architecture, cultural heritage, planning and zoning, as well as partnerships. We've made some great progress on implementing the plan, and in 2020 finally started the process to update it. This effort marks our first official update to our original plan. A main goal of this update is to create a new vision that will guide Arlington's preservation efforts for the next 10 years and beyond. Our update process began in spring of 2020 and focused on 2 main themes: what has changed since our original plan was adopted, and what have we accomplished since then? Our consultant conducted stakeholder interviews and studied our original plan closely, while the county staff concentrated on some initial public engagement and hosted a virtual kickoff event. The second phase of our planning process has been underway since early 2021. We've been focusing on the future of historic preservation by analyzing community feedback in response to online videos, feedback questionnaires, and various pop-up events. With our consultant, we also have been busy exploring new preservation tools and resource needs. Currently, we are getting ready to share the draft of our updated plan with our county leadership. We also are busy planning ahead for additional community engagement, which will coincide with the public release of the updated draft plan in the coming months. And as our planning process continues on, we really would welcome your insight. Please check our project webpage often, and you can learn more about the various engagement opportunities that will allow you to weigh in on the draft. And we hope to be able to release the draft plan, as I said, in the coming months and bring that forward to the county board in the first half of 2023. I also wanted to mention this evening the Historic Resources Inventory. Some of you may know it by its nickname, the HRI. This was the creation of the HRI was the main recommendation of our original master plan. The list of properties was approved by the county board back in 2011. And at the same time, the board also adopted HRI goals and policies. The HRI really is an innovative planning tool that helps establish preservation priorities and balances preservation with new development and other community benefits. The HRI includes nearly 400 historic properties, specifically garden apartments, shopping centers, and commercial buildings that date from approximately 1909 till about 1962. And they were surveyed and ranked based on not only their architectural and historical significance, but also their physical building integrity. Each property was then classified into one of 6 categories, beginning with essential, which are the highest ranking, going down through important, notable, minor, altered, and demolished. While the HRI does not afford historic buildings outright protection from demolition, it has, however, allowed historic preservation representatives, both staff as well as the HLRB, to have a seat at the table when redevelopment options for HRI properties are being considered by the county. This actually has resulted in several success stories, including the preservation of several key garden apartments as well as commercial buildings.
Cynthia, I'm going to go ahead and give you a time check here.
Okay, I'm almost done.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. So in addition to all the regulatory projects that I mentioned, I wanted to share a few examples of other types of projects that highlight cultural heritage, difficult history, and inclusionary history. The image on the left is from our Echoes of Little Saigon project, which was sponsored by the Virginia Humanities with a grant, and it highlights the Vietnamese American experience in Arlington. The middle photograph is a image of a county historic marker that we did in response to a request from the Halls Hill neighborhood. And I use this image to explain how our program helps clarify difficult history. We don't want to shy away from the challenges of dealing with the legacies of racial discrimination in marginalized communities. Those stories are important to share. And then lastly, on the right side of the slide, our program has been involved in recent months to help raise more awareness about Arlington's LGBTQ+ history. And as part of our engagement for our master plan update, we sponsored a video about Freddie's Beach Bar, which you can find on YouTube pretty easily. And then we've also started working on a research project to document the life and contributions of Dr. Lily Vincennes, who was a gay rights activist who lived in Arlington for many years. So lastly, I would encourage everyone to please go to the county website, search historic preservation, and on any one of our pages, you can sign up for our e-newsletter that we distribute several times per year. That's the best way to stay up to date on all of our activities and programs, including the master plan. And if you're specifically interested in the master plan, that is the link there that will take you to our project page. So with that, I will turn things over to Mr. Newig.
Perfect. Thanks, Cynthia. And Cynthia, feel free if you want to the link for the master plan and also that link for the where on the page that you were talking about where people can sign up for the e-newsletter. If you want to stick those in the chat box to go out to our audience, you're more than welcome to do that.
Thank you, Hannah.
Absolutely. All right. I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Rob. Thank you. Rob Newig serves as the Vice President for Preservation Services and Outreach at the National Trust for Historic Preservation. His department convenes the Preservation Movement's annual conference, manages the National Trust Most Endangered List, and ministers the Trust's grant making, among other programs. Rob actually grew up in Arlington, and he currently lives in the Dominion Hills neighborhood. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Rob.
Anna, thank you very, very much. And to Jerry Laporte, congratulations and thanks for the invitation to speak tonight. I was born and brought to Fairlington. I grew up in Arlington Forest, and now I live with my family in Dominion Hills. And my family has a fairly early connection to the Committee of 100. My mother, who at 95 lives at Goodwin House, in the late 1960s, she served as an assistant to the chair of the Committee of 100, Dr. Garner Joy. And my mother also worked closely with the program committee chair, Lyle Bryant, to help put together programs like this at an earlier era. So
I just want to say I love that. And if she wants a job, I'm available.
Okay, she's sharp as a pin. So I've been with the National Trust for Historic Preservation since 1994, and I'm a part of the National Trust that's worked in the field to help save places. I started in the National Trust out in Denver, and now have been at our headquarters since 2000. I want to share a few thoughts about the National Trust itself and our point of view about historic preservation today, and also about the National Historic Preservation movement and ongoing change in the movement itself. So here goes. We presume. I'm going to try and share my screen again. Just a moment. There we go. So the National Trust for Historic Preservation has 28 historic sites across the country that are open to the public for interpretation. And one of those is this modernist icon, the Edith Farnsworth House. And that's a place where for many years, the public could go to understand about the architectural design of the place by the world famous architect Mies van der Rohe. Relatively recently, the National Trust, as are many historic sites around the country, the National Trust began to reimagine the public interpretation so that it told the full story of the person, Dr. Edith Farnsworth, a medical researcher, a musician, a poet, and a patron of design, so that now at the Edith Farnsworth House, you can learn about the person who commissioned this piece of modernist architecture. So we have 28 sites. Closest, I would say, to Arlington is Woodlawn Plantation, which also is the site of the Pope Leahy House. So I encourage listeners to visit those places. So we have historic sites. As an organization, in fact, we were chartered to lobby for historic preservation. So we're active on the Hill. We annually lobby for federal dollars for historic preservation, which principally go to the states, where each state has a state historic preservation office. In Virginia, that's the Department of Historic Resources, headquartered in Richmond, but also at the federal level to various grant programs, like the Save America's Treasures program that's run by the National Park Service. We also, on the Hill, advocate for the establishment of new historic sites. So last year, Camp Amache in Colorado, near Granada, Colorado. Camp Amache was created as a federal, as a national historic site to commemorate the difficult history there of the unjust 1942 incarceration of Japanese Americans solely because of their ancestry. So we're active on the Hill, pressing for historic preservation. We also annually, as Hannah mentioned, we annually administer a national most endangered list. Many nonprofits at the state and even at the local level do most endangered lists as a way to highlight the importance of certain places, to point to certain sorts of threats, and also, as our program has evolved over 35 years, especially to highlight solutions. And this year, this is a map of the 2022 list of 11 most endangered. On this list, you're going to find Jamestown, that internationally significant place, Jamestown, and the Olivewood African American Cemetery in Houston, both on this list to highlight their significance, very different one from the other, but also the level of threat from climate change. Jamestown and sea level rise and extreme weather is undermining the preservation of that place. And Olivewood Cemetery, which is an old cemetery, the oldest cemetery in Houston, where members of that African-American community, freedmen, are buried. And unfortunately, that historic site is eroding because of climate change, extreme weather. So we interact with hundreds of preservationists around the country who are seeking to highlight the threatened important places in their neighborhoods through our most endangered list. We also network and partner with preservation groups around the country. And I think for Arlington preservationists, the National Preservation Partners Network is going to be an important group to plug into as Arlington thinks about what preservation should be in the future. The National Preservation Partners Network is made up of 100 groups from across the country, small cities, large cities, rural, urban, but all thinking together about the future of historic preservation. The National Trust and the Partners Network are working together, and you can find online under Preservation Priorities Task Force. You can find these issue briefs online. These are priority issues identified by those 100 groups around the country. Sustainability and climate action, affordable housing and density. Each of these in relatively succinct form, looking at these particular social issues through the lens of historic preservation. But if anything strengthens a historic preservation program or a historic preservation nonprofit, if anything strengthens it, it's networking and collaboration. So we're not all inventing the wheel. So that's networking. And then finally, about my organization, we provide grants to organizations, nonprofits, and also local governments across the country. We've been doing so for many, many years. In this fiscal year, we've distributed $9 million. And usually over the years, these grants went out in the form of seed grants. So timely, small grants that help both with plain old dollars, but also with the imprimatur of a national organization to say that the effort to consider the feasibility of preserving a certain place is important enough that the National Trust for Historic Preservation is investing. Most recently, the National Trust has received a fairly large grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. And this is ongoing right now, our Telling the Full History Preservation Fund. We've made 80 grants in response to 400 applications. So we have a sense of around the country how preservationists are thinking about their historic places, especially historic places that have, to this point, been underrepresented amongst those places officially recognized by the National Register of Historic Places and other things. This is an Indian boarding school. It's in Kansas, right outside of Kansas City. It's an 1839 building, 1839 school of great importance to the Shawnee tribe, which of course was relocated to Oklahoma. But this is an example of how the preservation movement is making an intentional shift to begin to formally recognize places that have not gotten the attention they deserve, and in some instances are suffering for it. So that's a bit about the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And I'll say that in the course of working on those grant programs and with the most endangered program and networking with preservationists around the country, we have, from our position, we have a sense of the personality of, the forward thinking of the historic preservation movement. And if you know the historic preservation movement, it's an expansive movement. And it does include the real estate developers who use the tax credits to save the places. It also includes the local landmarks commissioners who use local law to designate and protect historic places. So it's an expansive movement with all kinds of different people in it. At the local level, you're hearing today from the Municipal Preservation Office. You'll hear in a moment from the Landmarks Commission. And we know that in Arlington, there are non-governmental advocates for historic preservation. At the state level in Virginia, the State Historic Preservation Office is the Department of Historic Resources. And at the statewide level, there are a number of non-governmental, not-for-profit advocates, including principally Preservation Virginia. And I would encourage historic preservationists to plug into Preservation Virginia.
Rob, I'm going to give you a quick time check, please.
Thank you. At the national level, the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions, very important. And again, this National Partners Network. So in the course of our work with these groups, we have been hearing calls for change. And so over the last year, in a crowdsourcing process, we've engaged 700 people. And those 700 people have shared with us the values that they hold dear and that motivate them to do historic preservation. So here in this set of values, these principles that the National Trust has distilled from crowdsourcing, you see things that resonate for Arlington preservationists: managing community change, mitigating displacement, supporting equitable revitalization, and just holding on to those personal connections we have to place. So as Arlingtonians think about the future of preservation here, ruminating on these values shared across the movement is important. Then finally, out of those values came a set of goals. And these goals, which you can find online under National Impact Agenda and Historic Preservation, these 7 goals are ways for Arlington preservationists to assess their own set of goals against those in the broader historic preservation community. But I can imagine that here, an engaged public reaching broader audiences in the county through enriched storytelling, for example, or a more inclusive movement, increasing the diversity of the people who are leading preservation. These 7 goals are worth reflecting on as Arlington moves forward. Thanks very much. I'm looking forward to the discussion later in the call. Thanks very much.
Perfect. Thank you, Rob, very much. Really appreciate it. All right, I'm going to go ahead and kick it off to Dick Woodruff. He is the chairman of the Arlington County Historic Affairs and Landmark Review Board. When you hear at HALRB, that is that acronym, just to clarify. Dick is also born in Arlington and a continuous resident since 1982. We've got an unusual number of born and raised Arlingtonians up here today. Now mostly retired after a 40-year career working in the political and nonprofit sector in Washington. He spent 18 years on Capitol Hill, 7 years at the National Endowment for the Arts, 15 years as a nonprofit lobbyist with the American Cancer Society and the Alliance for Justice. Dick has served on Arlington's Urban Forestry and the Parks Commission previously, and he served on the HALRB, I keep stumbling, since 2010 and has been the chairman since 2019. He has a longtime interest in history and historic preservation, and he lives in Maywood since 1990, which is Arlington's only neighborhood historic district. He's a hiker, cycler, reader, writer, and owns a small farm in Rappahannock County and a historic stamp home in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which I'm sure you're going to invite us to at the end of this. And he's married for 40 years to Kate. So Kate, if you're joining us tonight, thanks for loaning him to us. And they have 2 kids who both went to WNL. Good school, go Generals. All right, Dick, pass it off to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Hannah. And I won't be having slides tonight. Thank you to the committee of 100 and to my HLRB colleague, Jerry Laporte, for putting this program together. And congratulations, Jerry, on your promotion to chairman. Jerry served on the HLRB for many years with me together, and more years than I, in fact, and knows how difficult it is to do historic preservation in Arlington, and how important it is to engage with the public on this issue. For me, history has always been a favorite interest, and I believe if you don't know what happened before, you can't really be sure of understanding the present, let alone the future. And now with respect to Arlington, let me just give you my sense of it. Any evidence of Arlington's pre-Columbian past is mostly underground, as is much of its colonial past. We know a lot about what happened and who lived here pre and post-Civil War, with a few exceptions. You know, the Ball Cemetery, the Ball Sellers House, Arlington House, most of those places are gone. I mean, other than those, the other places are gone. Very few pre-20th century homes are left. No early 20th century industrial or commercial buildings remain. And so what we are really left with here, and what we're dealing with in terms of historic preservation, are mostly buildings that have been constructed after 1900 and up to the 1970s. And so you may ask, what are those structures? They're the ubiquitous garden apartments, shopping strips like Shirlington and Garden City, the old commercial buildings in Clarendon, and what remains along Columbia Pike and Langston Boulevard. And they're the early 20th century homes in Maywood, which are protected, as you know. And in many other neighborhoods, there are such buildings or homes that are not protected and are being demolished now at a very alarming rate, as you know. These buildings and neighborhoods are what I'm talking about, and they're not particularly monumental. They function in our community today. They are the homes and the gathering places for most Arlingtonians. They are familiar places. They're built and enjoyed on a human scale, and they're part of the fabric of our community, all of them worth saving. Many of these places, the garden apartments, they're in their green spaces, which are considerable. The older homes and the commercial buildings are in danger of demolition due to development pressure. And we citizens lack power to impede that because we are effectively not organized to oppose it. Right now, there is no grassroots organization dedicated to preserving historic buildings and places in this county. There are committed individuals, of course, and I'm talking about folks like Tom Dickinson and John Reed and a few others who've worked hard to build consensus around protecting specific properties. Tom in particular has done yeoman's work. But despite their efforts, and I'm not being critical of their knowledge or commitment or substantial energy that they've put to the task, but despite all that, they've not been particularly successful. They need help, they need volunteers, and they need organization. And without organization, historic preservation will remain at best a secondary concern of our county leaders. And I'm talking about our elected officials and otherwise. Absent an organized public demand for action, historic preservation simply cannot compete for funding with other county priorities. I know how this works. In my former life, as Hannah mentioned, I was the head lobbyist for the American Cancer Society. We had a grassroots volunteer presence in every state and congressional district in the country. Those volunteers knew their representatives. They met them, they were heard by them, and they were very successful in making cancer a priority, a national federal funding priority. As chairman of the HLRB, I can assure you that despite their sympathetic public statements, our county board members and the county manager have not been willing to stand up to protect historic buildings in the face of determined developer, in case of a determined developer or an oppositional property owner. I say that because that has been our experience over the past 2.5 years. The county board has obfuscated or disregarded the HLRB's preservation requests in 3 specific instances, which I would like to make you aware of. The HRI important investor building at Courthouse was demolished, and this happened just recently. The facade will be reconstructed in a different location of this new 20-story building that's taking its place on the block. That was one instance in which the board failed to protect a HRI important property and considered this sort of half-hearted facade effort to be historic preservation. The HRI, in the second instance, the HRI Essential Joyce Motors building will be demolished, but a few of its porcelain enamel plates will be placed at a different location on the 15-story building that will take its place. This is what is called facade preservation, but it's not really, because it's just taking part of the old frontage of the building and placing it on the new building, a part of the old building. It's not really historic preservation by any definition or any standard definition. But the truly egregious act was when the county government failed to protect the demolition of the historic Febres-Lothrop mansion and its complex of outbuildings without any substantive effort to either document the buildings or salvage any of the historic features within. Everything came down on that property and went to the dump the day the owners received the demolition permit from the county. On this matter, I'm sorry to say that the county leadership was simply out to lunch. And I'm not talking about my historic preservation program colleagues. They worked as hard as they possibly could to save those buildings, but they were essentially failed by their leadership. This property had long been recognized as a possible future park per the county's open space master plan. But here's what happened in reality. When the property went on the market, the asking price in the neighborhood of $30 million, the county signaled, no way, we don't have the money, we can't afford it. That's understandable. What was not understandable was their inability to engage in any reasonable exploration of alternatives to purchase. After Tom Dickinson filed his petition to make the property an historic district, and it landed with us at the HLRB, I approached the county board and manager with a plan to create a small 2-acre district encompassing the mansion and the view shed from Wilson Boulevard, which would have allowed the development of the single-family homes nearby on the property, which the owners wanted to do. I say they envisioned that at least, but they had no interest in doing that development themselves. They just wanted to sell the property free and clear of any encumbrances for future development, thus ensuring their greatest return. While the petition for the historic preservation was pending before the HLRB, the petition to protect the property owners filed for a demolition permit. Subsequently, per our authority to protect a historic structure from imminent demolition, HLRB passed a series of resolutions over several weeks, ordering first a study of the property's historic significance, which we already knew was substantial, and then recommend historic preservation of the property to the county board, a small section of the property. The county board subsequently adopted the motion to advertise that, but then failed to follow up in a timely way before the demolition permit was issued, sealing the demise of the structures on the property within a matter of hours. Throughout the months prior, the historic preservation staff, tried as they did, were not allowed on the property to even document the buildings, despite our repeated requests. And I do not believe our county leaders did much to support the historic preservation staff to do that during that time. It was only after the demolition permit was issued that Ms. Lichez Torres was allowed on site with a camera to photograph the buildings while they were being demolished around her. I kid you not. It was such a wasted opportunity and a needed failure because the county leadership did have options. Sorry, they did have options that may or may not have saved the historic mansion, but we'll never know because they didn't try. Tom Dickinson, bless his heart, worked to mobilize a grassroots campaign to support the buildings, and he deserves huge credit for his efforts, but his work alone was never going to be enough. More Arlingtonians needed to join that fight, and they need to come together now for the next one, because there is going to be a next one. As chairman of the HLRB, I appreciate being able to be heard tonight and to tell you what the experience is like in Arlington trying to protect historic buildings. We need your help. Thank you so much. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dick. All right, Dick, Rob, and Cynthia, if you guys can all turn on your cameras and unmute. And Daniel, you're welcome to go ahead and spotlight all of us here. We're going to get to our Q&A. A reminder to our attendees that you can use that Q&A box at the bottom of the screen in Zoom to enter your questions. We do have some that have come in. We also have the questions that many of you submitted with your registration. So we're going to go ahead and kick off here. But that box is a good place to take a look. So I'm going to start with our first question. Should Arlington have a resident curator program in place to use in case the county comes into possession of a historic property deserving of preservation that would be a good fit for such program, much like Fairfax County has done? And I'll let y'all chime in based on if you want to answer the question.
Yeah, I'll say a word and then I think I'll punt to Cynthia. That kind of a program has worked in other communities around the country. When an appropriate property comes into the public hands, to put a steward in place so that the building can be maintained by someone who's living in it. So good idea, innovative, and something I think the county should try. Cynthia?
No, thank you for that question. I know this is a concept that has been discussed in the county in years past related to other historic properties such as farmhouses and other and some demolished buildings that unfortunately have been lost. But to undertake something like that in the county, I think really one of the reasons why that hasn't happened yet is it really does require a significant amount of planning as well as investment, not only on the staff side, but also on the capital side. And there would need to be, I think, a study done to even determine how feasible and viable creating that program here would be. Ideally, you would want to create such a program with a whole portfolio of historic properties in mind, as opposed to an individual property one at a time. I think we have never been directed to study that as an option. I do think it has, as Mr. Neilig said, it has proven successful in other places. But I just think that there's probably too much legwork that would need to happen in order to set up anything like that in a timely fashion here.
Dick, would you like to add anything? You're on mute.
Sorry, no, I don't. Thank you.
Okay, great. Eleanor asks, what efforts are being made to discuss the complex history of Arlington's built environment beyond just architecture?
I can take a stab at that one. That's a great question, Eleanor. Thank you for asking that. A lot of what our program has been striving to do over the past decade is to move the conversation beyond just physical historic buildings. yes, buildings are tangible. Yes, they are important physical links to our past, but the community, the members who comprise our community, their experiences, their stories are also equally important. And so we've been making a concerted effort to really broaden that conversation. So it's important to understand Clarendon, for example, as Arlington's original downtown. Clarendon's been well documented. I think a lot of people still gravitate to the area because of the vibe that it offers and the character and the historic buildings that are there. But what a lot of people don't realize, which is, you know, why certain projects that our program sponsors that deal with cultural heritage are so important. You would not know walking through the blocks of Clarendon today that that used to be the hub of Vietnamese culture on the East Coast in the 1970s and early 1980s. And so being able to broaden the narrative to include not only a more inclusive narrative, but those personal narratives of the people who've lived here, who've worked here, and who have shaped Arlington. That really is a focus for not only our program, but I think also for the preservation of the future, both locally as well as throughout the state and the nation.
Yeah, I mean,
Cynthia, I've never, oh, sorry, go ahead, Rob.
there's no question that the intangible side of historic preservation, and that's real, there's no question that that's the part that inspires most people. And there are municipal efforts happening around the country to designate places, neighborhoods, let's say, that reflect a certain cultural expression. So it's happening, it is well accepted, and it's a way, as Cynthia says, you're talking about educating people and informing them and moving them. And in any kind of historic preservation, you have to have the people behind you, and they have to be motivated to be with you. That, I think, goes to Dick's point about activating Arlingtonians to preserve place.
And I'll just add to what Cynthia said. She undersold it a little bit. There's a whole lot that they do. For instance, there's a wonderful series of, what do you call them? Historic markers in Clarendon that elucidate all of the history of Arlington through all of the wars: World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, War on Terror. There are African-American cemeteries that are protected because of their cultural value to the community. There's all sorts of different stuff that we do that has actually nothing to do with buildings.
Cynthia, I'm a big lover of small local businesses, and I never pass up an opportunity for a local business plug in Arlington, because you've alluded to Clarendon's history, especially its ethnic history. And there is one restaurant there left in Clarendon, I think, right? That's a great place for people to go out to get dinner to support that history. Which, would you share that restaurant?
That's correct. The sole survivor of the Little Saigon era is Nam Viet. And if you're not familiar with Clarendon, you might not know it's there because it's not on the main drag. It's tucked away. I believe it's on Hudson Street, but Nam Viet's been owned by the same family. I think it's in the second generation now, if I'm not mistaken. But if you have not eaten there, you are definitely missing out. So go support a local business.
And that second generation is a general alumni, is what I've heard as well.
Oh.
So, yeah. Thank you, Cynthia. I appreciate that. One of the best ways to support any cause is to vote with your feet. So I love the support of local business. Thank you for humoring me. You referenced some of the recognition of wars, and actually we have a great question in war era times, excuse me. We have a great question from Alistair. He says, Alistair, I hope I pronounced your name right. Please forgive me if I did not. What is your take on how well Arlington preserves its Civil War forts? What fort is at the greatest risk for being lost? I'm personally not familiar, but I assume you all are.
Well, I think Arlington does a fantastic job preserving the Civil War forts. And it's a big job because there's so many of them. I can't honestly say which one is most endangered. Perhaps Cynthia knows.
I don't know of any that are endangered. There are 3 technically that are protected as local historic districts. Fort C.F. Smith, as well as Fort Ethan Allen and the Fort Ethan Allen Trench are all protected with local historic district zoning overlays. And we do work very closely with our colleagues in the Department of Parks and Recreation to oversee and manage, whether it's signage or new cannon or displays or whatever maintenance that they need to undertake there. But I'm not aware of any that are threatened at the moment.
Thank you. All right, we have, I was excited about this question. We have about the Hume School and the Black Heritage Museum. What do you see as the proper role for Arlington County to play to help ensure that the Arlington County Historical Society's Museum on Ridge Road and the Black Heritage Museum down on Columbia Pike currently have a bright and enduring future? Any thoughts? I know this is a hot button when I hear people talking about this a lot. I'm curious if you have.
I can start.
Yeah, please.
One of the things that's key in this particular relationship with both of those great organizations or any other local community organization is partnership, is collaboration, having an appreciation for what each organization is trying to accomplish. Are there intersection points where we could collaborate on projects? I know my program in the past, we've been invited by the Historical Society to provide lectures and on topics of interest, whether it's historic research or other things. So I think being able to rely on each other in a partnership capacity to sponsor programming, to work together for common causes, I think those are very important first steps. And we do welcome being able to partner with both organizations.
Great, thank you. Rob, Dick?
Yeah, well, I'll say that nationally, places like those two institutions that organize programming around highly relevant issues to bring in people who would not otherwise visit, so that programming about top issues in the country happen at those places, and while people are there, they gain an understanding of what's happening. I mean, historic sites host things like wine fests. Well, yes, the person is there to sample wine, but while they're there, they also have an opportunity for a personal experience of a historic place, and that's what hooks people to care about the place, to care about the history. So, and I'm sure both of these institutions are doing this, but bringing in programming that's not just directly about the heritage that they're there primarily to preserve. That's a piece of advice.
Well, since I have the opportunity, I'm going to make a pitch for the Lee Center, which is another old historic Arlington school on Langston Boulevard, which currently houses the Arlington Arts Center, and which is probably going to go away for lack of funding. The building, I think, is scheduled for demolition at some point. I think that's the long-range plan, unfortunately. But one of the interesting things that most people don't know is that it houses one of the only gas-fired ceramic kilns in the area. And I'm not sure anybody even knows that, but the ceramicists who have the good fortune to be able to use it.
Thank you. All right, Julie is taking it back to some of our programs that we have had in the past. Julie, you must be a regular here. Julie asks, how does the historic preservation community regard upzoning proposed as part of the expanded missing middle housing?
Do you want to take that or shall I? Cindy.
It's a big
Well,
one.
I don't have a full answer. I will let you chime in a moment, Dick, but I will say, if it's any reassurance, part of our team's role is to be part and work with our colleagues on these major planning studies. So we are ones who are advocating for the interests of historic preservation, for the interests of historic buildings where we can. And I do know that that is a study that's in its fairly early stages, if I'm not mistaken. And so that work is ongoing. And I think it's definitely going to be challenging work to strike all the balances that are needed. So I will leave my comment at that, just knowing that, we are involved in it behind the scenes. I don't know, Dick, if you wanted to add anything.
No, I think that sums it up really well. Thank you.
So let me suggest that viewers search on the internet for the Preservation Priorities Task Force and look at those 4 issue briefs that I pointed to, one of which is about density. And that issue brief explores some of the tools being used around the country that being explored around the country for adding density without losing the character of a historic. So that's a place to look for the kinds of tools that are being explored. Thanks.
Thank you. We had a question here. This was a good one. John is asking, what happened to the historic preservation of Westover Apartments? I remember that being talked about. I don't remember where that landed.
That's a good question. We haven't forgotten about it, despite what some might think. That is something that is still in our queue of active designation requests. I know that the request is now a few years old, but the HLRB has had 2, believe it was 2 official public hearings on the request over the past few years. I believe the most recent one was a few years ago. I want to say like 2017, 2018 is what's coming to my mind, at which point the HLRB did direct county staff to study the garden apartments within the Westover neighborhood, which is listed on the National Register. But to do that, once the countywide housing studies that were in place at the time were completed. And the study that I'm referring to was the Housing Conservation District study, which got rebranded, I think sometime the beginning of the pandemic, into the multifamily reinvestment study. So that work kind of broadened into a different type of study. So that is the main reason why the HLRB has not reconsidered that active designation request, because we're waiting to see how those additional studies will inform preservation within that neighborhood. And again, I'll reiterate the comment that I made previously. Our team is a big part of that staff team that is working on those housing studies. So we are involved on that level, as well as from the designation side when the time comes for that.
Great. We did have a question. I'm going to quickly answer. Someone asked, I'm sorry, I missed the name of who asked this, but where they can rewatch this presentation to catch a lot of the points. I know we've had a lot of great detail. This is currently being streamed on Facebook Live. So if you go to our Facebook page, when the program is over, there will be a recording on the Facebook page. And then within the next few days, we're an all volunteer organization, so I don't commit to how long this will be, but it will be, the recording will be up on our website. So if you are frantically taking notes and you miss something, you can rewatch. I'm gonna we're a little tight on time here, and there was one great question that I want to ask was Diana. For our audience, what are some of the volunteer opportunities available, and who do we contact? How do people act?
Really great question, Diana. I think there's so many different ways we can answer that. For those of you with experience and a true passion for history and preservation, and you want to share your talents with the HLRB, that is a volunteer commission that the county board appoints all those members, as well as other commissions countywide. So if you want to give of your time and expertise in that way, consider volunteering on the HLRB. I know that there are very interesting projects happening right now with some of our partner organizations, with the Arlington Historical Society and the Black Heritage Museum of Arlington. I believe that there's some volunteer opportunities available on their respective websites as well. And I would say too, for those who are just interested in learning more and want to share ideas, I would really encourage you to pay attention to our effort to update our master plan. We need to hear what Arlingtonians desire in terms of preservation. We want to know what you need in terms of tools, what would be beneficial to you, what you would like to see preserved, all those types of things. And in the coming months, there will be ample opportunity to be able to provide that feedback. I know that's not quite volunteering in the traditional sense, but it is volunteering your insight. And that is really important to help us shaping the future of our preservation here in the county.
Robert, Dick, do you want to add anything there?
Can I just follow up a little bit?
Sure.
And I don't know if this is a constructive answer or not, but it kind of goes back to what I said in my remarks earlier. It would be great if folks who wanted to volunteer on the subject could volunteer in advocacy and to form together, whether it might be managed by somebody who's done it already, like Tom Dickinson, or under the auspices of the Arlington Historical Society. I don't know whether they would be interested in forming a subcommittee on advocacy or something like that, but it's something that's really needed. And it's something that volunteers can do, I think, without being overly skilled or knowledgeable about the issue, and be super helpful. And so maybe one of those organizations or Tom could help put that together.
Thank you very much. Tom I did see Tom in the audience, and it sounds like he's been assigned a couple jobs tonight. So Tom didn't know what he was getting into. All right, I'm going to ask, we're heading up close to our time. I'm going to ask everyone in the audience to stick with us for just about 2 more minutes. We're just going to conclude here. Most importantly, I want to thank Rob and Cynthia and Dick for being with us here tonight. Our audience, there's a lot of preparation that goes into these programs. You get to show up and get all the benefit of it, but these folks have put in a lot of work leading up, and we're really grateful to them for all that time and for their expertise and for the work they do every day. Again, thank you to our Committee 100 board and our program committee who helped put this together. Daniel, would you please put up that final slide up on the screen? Tonight, I know this is our last program of this program year, but it's really not goodbye. It is see you later. We'll be taking a break over the summer, and I hope you will too. But in the fall, we're going to be right back with a lineup of programs. You heard me kind of allude to earlier, we do have a goal of bringing back in-person programming in some capacity. We're still determining what that looks like, format, location, consistency, all of that. So stay tuned. But we have gone ahead and tentatively planned our topics for the fall. This is what we're aiming for, and you can see them on your screen here. We try to be pretty firm on these, but every once in a while every once in a while we do a little bit of a pivot. But this is what we're aiming for now: September, October, and November. A reminder, if you want to see the recording for tonight, take a look at our Facebook page or wait a couple days and take a look at our website. If you want to share this with anyone you know who would benefit from the program, please feel free to do that. We would love and welcome that. Thank you all for supporting the Arlington Committee of 100. Thank you for being bought in on our mission and our work to educate and bring together folks over learning. And thank you personally for all the support over the last 2 years as my term as chair. I've been very grateful to be part of this organization, and I look forward to continuing to support this organization for many years to come. Everyone have a great evening.
Thank you.